We share a planet with adults who argue with inanimate objects and complain when water is too wet. The customer is supposedly always right, but these 51-star reviews prove the customer is usually just entirely separated from reality. Here is the undeniable proof that common sense went extinct a long time ago. Let's look at the absolute bottom of the intelligence barrel. 1. We all know Tide Pods look like forbidden candy, but someone actually took the time to leave a furious 1-star review because they hated the, quote, horrible chemical taste. Yes, a fully grown adult popped a capsule of concentrated laundry detergent into their mouth and was genuinely outraged it didn't burst with a refreshing mixed berry flavor. At this point in human evolution, those massive warning labels aren't just for legal protection against lawsuits. They are a desperate, flashing neon sign begging us to save our own species from total self-destruction. 2. You would think carving 4 massive presidential heads into a solid granite mountain would be enough to impress most people. Nope. One highly entitled tourist slapped Mount Rushmore with a 1-star rating simply because the back is not finished. This visionary traveler was legitimately fuming that the original sculptors didn't spend an extra 50 years dynamiting George Washington's stone mullet into the rear of the cliff. The sheer geographical arrogance happening here is honestly a much bigger monument than the actual mountain itself. 3. Dropping a massive, heavy hammer directly onto your foot is generally a bad time, but for one guy, it became a reason to leave a 1-star review on his steel-toed work boots. His main grievance was that the footwear barely protected him from the brutal impact. The absolute miracle here is that this genius still had fully intact, unsmashed toes left to frantically type out his furious internet rant. The boots performed a literal feat of modern engineering, won the physical battle against gravity, and still somehow lost the public relations war. 4. Imagine being sound asleep, only to be rudely awakened by a blaring siren. Tragic, right? Well, a local fire department was publicly shamed with a brutal 1-star review for the unforgivable crime of making way too much noise during a late-night emergency run. The reviewer was absolutely beside themselves because their precious beauty sleep was interrupted. It is incredibly bleak to realize that someone else's family home actively burning to the ground in a blazing inferno was nothing more than a minor irritation to this person's deeply important REM cycle. 5. A ridiculously expensive, high-powered kitchen blender was completely trashed in the review section because it aggressively obliterated the user's morning smoothie. What exactly were they expecting? A delicate, romantic swirl of fruit? Instead, they were downright terrified when they unleashed a violent, high-RPM fruit apocalypse inside a plastic pitcher. That is the exact equivalent of buying a massive V8 muscle car and immediately calling the dealership in tears because it doesn't handle like a battery-powered golf cart. Some folks just wander through life actively searching for reasons to be disappointed. 6. Fitness is hard, but it's a lot harder when you refuse to participate in reality. A comprehensive diet and exercise book caught a vicious 1-star rating because the buyer didn't lose a single pound. When an incredibly patient soul in the comments asked if they had actually tried following the dietary plan, the furious buyer responded that they simply haven't had time to read it yet. This intellectual heavyweight genuinely believed that buying a paperback book and letting it sit on a coffee table would magically melt away body fat through sheer atmospheric osmosis. 7. The total lack of basic object permanence in this next review honestly deserves to be studied in a high-security medical laboratory. An industrial-strength SPF 50 sunscreen earned a fiery 1-star rating because the user entirely failed to get a golden summer tan. Let that sink in for a second. This person meticulously applied a chemical barrier specifically engineered by scientists to block out the sun's dangerous ultraviolet rays, and then threw a massive public tantrum when the lotion flawlessly blocked out the sun's rays. 8. Absolutely nothing is sacred anymore on the internet, not even innocent children's educational events. One deeply offended parent gave a local middle school spelling bee a 1-star review, complaining bitterly that the words were way too difficult and the whole ordeal caused unnecessary stress for everyone involved. What this parent fundamentally demanded was a competitive academic tournament where the central challenge of actually spelling difficult words was completely eradicated. Maybe next year they can just hand out giant gold trophies to kids for successfully breathing oxygen. 9. The most agonizing part of this next story is that the core issue is literally spelled out in the product's name. A very confused individual left a scathing 1-star review for a premium silent dog whistle. Their heartbreaking complaint claimed the item arrived completely broken because no sound came out when they blew into it. This is no longer just a bad consumer experience with an online retailer. This is a highly public, tragic confession of a functional adult entirely failing to grasp basic reading comprehension. 10. A premium, highly detailed desktop globe caught a furious 1-star rating from an extremely disappointed customer. Their main reason for the brutal score? They spent hours closely inspecting the spinning sphere and simply couldn't find their specific suburban house printed anywhere on it. This functional adult genuinely expected a map of the entire planet to feature a microscopic rendering of their concrete driveway and backyard patio furniture. Sometimes, the sheer gravitational pull of human narcissism is far more impressive than anything the actual Earth has to offer. 11. We have officially reached a true masterpiece of totally flawed human logic. A children's learn-to-read educational kit was slammed with a single star from an angry parent. Their primary grievance was that the parent instruction manual required you to already know how to read to figure out the lessons. The incredibly basic concept that they, the fully literate adult who purchased the item, were the intended audience for the manual, was apparently a bridge entirely too far for their brain to cross. 12. If you purchase an alarm clock explicitly built for heavy sleepers, its sole purpose for existing in this universe is to be as utterly obnoxious as humanly possible. Yet, a wildly indignant customer dropped a 1-star rating complaining that the machine was startlingly loud and violently woke them up in a total panic. They completely forgot how commerce works. They were not leaving a critical review of a faulty electronic device. They were just accidentally posting a glowing 5-star testimonial confirming that the terrifying machine did exactly what they paid for. 13. Operating heavy machinery should probably require a basic sanity test at checkout. A weekend warrior purchased a heavy-duty logging chainsaw and immediately stamped it with a 1-star review. Their list of terrifying discoveries included that the machine was extremely noisy, vibrated way too much, and was very dangerous if not handled properly. This individual willingly bought a gas-guzzling tool that is essentially a high-speed, motorized chain of metallic death, and was genuinely taken aback that operating it wasn't a peaceful, meditative spa experience in their backyard. 14. You honestly have to stand back and respect the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this literary critic. The Merriam-Webster English Dictionary was utterly dragged through the mud with a 1-star review for having way too many characters and absolutely no plot whatsoever. This person even had the nerve to suggest the author should really narrow down their focus to a single, compelling storyline for the sequel. Sitting down to formally critique the literal foundational building blocks of human communication as if it were a boring airport thriller novel is wild. 15. Humanity is truly exhausting, especially when public infrastructure is involved. A newly constructed multi-million-dollar suspension bridge earned a brutal 1-star review from a local commuter who loudly complained that it just takes you directly to the other side of the river. What on earth was this driver mentally preparing for during their morning commute? A mystical, glowing portal to another dimension? A scenic, toll-free detour straight into the heart of Narnia? The entire structural job description of this massive concrete monument is quite literally right there in its name. 16. Filing a formal complaint against your own terrible motor skills is certainly a choice. Someone was so enraged by their dining experience that they left a 1-star review for a basic glass salt shaker. The official stated reason for this anger was that the salt comes out way too fast. This person was absolutely seething that a tiny glass bottle, specifically designed with holes in the top and operated entirely by the laws of gravity, dared to dispense tiny rocks via those exact holes in gravity. 17. If you have ever felt even a tiny bit claustrophobic while sitting inside an automatic car wash, this level of stupidity is dedicated specifically to you. A terrified customer slapped a local wash with 1 star because the giant attacking brushes were deeply terrifying to look at. They willingly drove their expensive vehicle onto a conveyor belt leading straight into the belly of a soapy, flailing mechanical beast, and then threw a massive fit that it wasn't a gentle candlelit massage for their sedan. 18. Traveling abroad really opens your mind, unless you're this specific American tourist. They left a completely serious one-star review aimed at the entire sovereign nation of Italy. The irate traveler complained heavily about the annoying overabundance of old buildings and was deeply offended that everyone everywhere was speaking Italian. The sheer, unfiltered arrogance required to travel across the globe and be furious at a foreign country for having the nerve to actually be foreign is a level of geographical entitlement that defies all known logic. 19. Going out of your way to eat somewhere you hate is a strange hobby. For instance, what exactly are you hoping to find when you willingly walk through the doors of an advertised vegan restaurant? According to one furious internet reviewer, the answer is a juicy steak. They smashed a popular plant-based eatery with 1 star because the menu was tragically full of vegetables and entirely lacked any real meat. That is the exact equivalent of walking into a city aquarium and loudly complaining to the manager that the floors are entirely too damp. 20. The legendary internet reviews for bulk sugar-free gummy bears exist in their own special circle of gastrointestinal hell. One spectacular 1-star epic detailed a restroom event of truly biblical proportions, describing the horrifying physical aftermath in graphic, terrifying detail. This brave soul wrote their complaint as if they had barely survived a Category 5 hurricane, rather than a handful of 10-cent gelatin candies. Perhaps taking 3 seconds to read the highly specific warning label on the plastic bag could have saved both their plumbing and their dignity. 21. Taking a sharp key to the side of your brand new truck and then furiously calling the manufacturer to complain about their weak exterior paint job makes 0 sense. Yet that is exactly what happened with a professional-grade non-stick frying pan. It caught a nasty 1-star review claiming the protective coating flaked right off after a single use. However, buried deep within the furious rant, the home chef casually admitted to using a sharp metal fork to aggressively scrape and scramble their morning eggs. 22. Navigation can be tricky, but this 1-star review for a brass pocket compass truly redefines the concept of being completely lost. The deeply annoyed hiker left a furious complaint stating that the device was absolutely broken because, as they wrote, it frustratingly just keeps pointing north no matter which way I turn. They actually wanted the magnetic needle to magically point towards their parked car like a modern smartphone app. The magnetic field of the Earth is apparently no match for sheer, unadulterated human ignorance. 23. An incredibly observant visitor to the Statue of Liberty proudly stamped the iconic monument with a 1-star review because it was entirely green. This person was completely red in the face, furious that the giant lady wasn't the shiny, polished copper color they had seen in ancient history books. They went online to literally complain to the government about the unstoppable, natural chemical process of oceanic oxidation. Do not worry, buddy. The National Parks Department will get right out there with a power washer and some copper polish just for you. 24. There are just some brutal life lessons out there that absolutely have to be learned the hard way, usually involving a pair of tweezers and a lot of crying. Someone actually visited a gardening website to give a small potted cactus a 1-star review because it was way too sharp and incredibly unpleasant to cuddle with. This botanical genius willingly purchased a desert plant that is globally famous for its painful, defensive spikes, and was heavily disappointed that the greenery didn't want to be their new soft, squishy teddy bear. 25. This individual has officially reached the absolute pinnacle of hating everything and has simply run out of earthly things to complain about. Found lurking on an incredibly obscure internet forum is a literal 1-star review for planet Earth itself. This highly sophisticated resident complained bitterly about the excessive and heavy gravity, an incredibly boring and repetitive day and night cycle, and completely faulty climate controls. To top it all off, they sternly noted that the other billions of tenants are extremely loud and obnoxious. 26. The human mind truly boggles at the sheer density of this next complaint. A local public library was slapped with a 1-star rating specifically because the building was way too quiet, and the incredibly rude librarian kept shushing them and their friends. This person consciously walked into a taxpayer-funded structure entirely dedicated to the ancient art of silent, focused reading, and then threw a massive public temper tantrum about the strict enforcement of silent reading. It's a library, not a sports bar during the Super Bowl. 27. Asking modern science to break the fundamental laws of physics for your hiking trip is a bold strategy. A highly durable pair of outdoor waterproof pants earned a 1-star review solely because they made an annoying swishing sound when the person tried to walk through the woods. This rugged explorer wanted the high-tech, magical ability to completely repel heavy rainstorms, but they absolutely demanded that the synthetic friction be as silent as a ninja in the night. You honestly cannot write comedy better than real life. 28. Somewhere out there in the universe, Charles Darwin is weeping uncontrollably into his hands while reading this person's internet history. An incredibly brave tourist driving through Yellowstone National Park left a furious 1-star review because the wild grizzly bears wouldn't come close enough to the rental car for a really good picture. This person was legitimately having a meltdown. That massive, wildly unpredictable apex predators weren't acting like paid actors cooperating for an afternoon family photo op. 29. Instead of buying a 5-cent microfiber cloth like a normal human being, this pioneer chose to be absolutely furious at a major tech company for the biological makeup of their own greasy hands. A brand new $1,000 smartphone was absolutely savaged with a 1-star review entirely because the pristine touchscreen kept getting covered in ugly fingerprints. They basically just discovered the ancient scientific principle that human skin naturally produces microscopic oils, and that shiny glass perfectly displays those smudges. 30. The literal reason a reusable water bottle exists is the ability to reuse the bottle over and over. That incredibly basic concept was completely lost on a reviewer who slammed a popular brand with a single star because the container kept getting empty, and they had to walk to the sink to refill it constantly. This person has just tragically discovered the very real concept of finite liquid capacity, and they are absolutely not a fan of how earthly physics handles their daily hydration schedule. 31. Behold a legendary 1-star review for a vegan chocolate chip cookie recipe that perfectly captures the collective intelligence of the internet. The baker proudly announced in the comments that they had bravely substituted all the listed vegan ingredients for massive amounts of real butter, whole milk, and farm-fresh eggs. They then furiously complained that the resulting cookies were completely ruined because they were no longer vegan. Folks, that is not a deeply flawed internet recipe. That is a spectacularly failed human IQ test. 32. Prepare yourself for a spectacular 1-star review aimed at a premium, heavy-duty steak knife set. The terrifying reason for the low rating? The giant blades were dangerously sharp right out of the box, and the poor user almost cut themselves while eating dinner. This culinary genius willingly purchased a specialized set of metal tools perfectly engineered by craftsmen for the effortless severing of thick meat, and was utterly appalled when the steel turned out to be incredibly good at its one and only job. 33. The poor optics manufacturer actually had to reply and patiently explain that, yes, you are fundamentally supposed to keep both of your human eyes open at the exact same time. Why? Because a brutal 1-star review for a pair of high-end hunting binoculars confidently claimed the lenses were totally shattered. As the furious user wrote, "I can only see out of one eye when I look through them." This specific complaint might honestly be the most painfully human review ever typed into a keyboard. 34. I suppose everyone has completely different priorities when facing total financial ruin. An emergency kitchen fire extinguisher was hit with a deeply resentful 1-star review for making an absolute huge mess when it was frantically deployed to put out a massive grease fire. The homeowner was totally appalled by the thick white chemical powder that aggressively coated their countertops. They somehow conveniently ignored the tiny little detail that their entire wooden house was no longer actively burning to the ground in a catastrophic inferno. 35. Apparently, all this person actually wanted was for their smartphone to completely lie to them so they could eat soggy potato salad in blissful ignorance. Someone angrily logged into the App Store to give their premium weather tracking app a brutal 1-star review. Why? because the software highly accurately predicted an afternoon thunderstorm, which subsequently ruined their outdoor picnic. This user wasn't throwing a fit because the digital forecast was terribly wrong. They were seething with rage because the app was entirely right. 36. Try to imagine sitting down to type out a massive, multi-paragraph one-star review for a small local business entirely because you physically could not get inside the building. The angry reviewer detailed their sweaty, Herculean effort to violently pull the heavy glass door open, aggressively calling the hinges defective. The business owner's public response was a masterpiece of absolute simplicity. They just posted a zoomed-in photograph of the giant, unmissable, brightly colored sign right at eye level on that very door that clearly read, "Push." 37. Signing a contract for an expensive getaway, heavily advertised for its complete lack of human conversation, and then being offended by the silence is legendary behavior. An incredibly expensive, completely silent meditation retreat was violently slammed with a one-star rating online for being deeply unfriendly and terribly antisocial. The visiting guest was genuinely hurt and totally upset that not a single person would chat with them during a mandatory, strictly enforced 10-day vow of total silence. They got exactly what they paid for and absolutely hated it. 38. At what exact moment does a consumer product functioning flawlessly turn into a massive corporate conspiracy? For one deeply suspicious reviewer, it was a simple organic bar of shower soap. They brutally gave it 1 star because the physical block mysteriously disappeared way too quickly after just a few short weeks of daily scrubbing. This person has essentially jumped online to file a heavily worded formal complaint against the fundamental scientific concepts of friction, water solubility, and personal hygiene. 39. Did this homeowner genuinely think the liquid chemicals would telepathically know they just wanted a slightly moody hipster vibe and not the literal, crushing darkness of a light-absorbing black hole? A standard gallon can of matte black interior paint received an incredibly angry 1-star review. 39. Did this homeowner genuinely think the liquid chemicals would telepathically know they just wanted a slightly moody hipster vibe and not the literal, crushing darkness of a light-absorbing black hole? A standard gallon can. 40. The sheer, suffocating irony of this next review is so unbelievably thick that you could pour it into a mold and build a solid concrete house out of it. A popular, critically acclaimed book focusing entirely on the philosophy of extreme minimalism got slapped with a 1-star rating specifically for being way too short. The buyer heavily complained about a severe lack of extra content, missing the entire philosophical point of the author so spectacularly that they honestly deserve a solid gold medal. 41. This brave soul has officially grabbed a sword and declared open warfare on the unstoppable, linear progression of time itself. A simple, highly decorative paper wall calendar was severely punished with a 1-star review for exposing a massive fundamental flaw. Directly after December 31st, the pages just completely end. The buyer was absolutely furious that they were being forced by the company to purchase a brand new one for the following year, aggressively labeling the paper product a total scam and a sinister planned obsolescence scheme. 42. A major automotive manufacturer was hit with a totally unhinged 1-star review for a brand new SUV because the dashboard check engine light suddenly illuminated. The driver was absolutely fuming, aggressively calling the tiny glowing icon an incredibly distracting and heavily annoying luxury feature. They bizarrely didn't have a single issue with the fact that their expensive engine was literally dying. They just deeply hated the tiny orange bulb that was dutifully trying to save them from a catastrophic highway explosion. 43. There are certain internet reviews out there that force you to deeply question the survival of our species. A plastic bag of gas station ice caught a furious 1-star rating specifically because it entirely melted into a giant puddle after being locked inside a boiling hot car for 6 solid hours. This isn't just a terribly written product review. This is a spectacularly failed elementary school science experiment regarding thermodynamics that this person just decided to make the grocery store's legal problem. 44. Literally every single visual and textual warning cue on the glass screamed imminent danger, Yet this culinary thrill-seeker still willingly dove headfirst right into the fiery pits of hell. A terrifying premium bottle of ghost pepper hot sauce, which was very clearly and aggressively labeled with a flaming red skull and crossbones, earned a tear-soaked one-star review for being painfully and brutally spicy. The brave reviewer was completely shocked and felt betrayed that the dark red sludge severely burned the roof of their mouth. 45. The noble quest to expertly learn a foreign language from an instructor who completely lacks any trace of that exact language's accent is a bold, terrifying new frontier in the realm of human stupidity. A highly rated, incredibly expensive audio course designed for learning conversational Spanish got wrecked with a one-star review because the professional narrator spoke with a really thick Spanish accent. The buyer aggressively noted that this made the native teacher way too hard to understand while driving their car. 46. What exactly happens when an incredibly modern tourist walks into a local history museum actively expecting the glowing aesthetic of a futuristic technology store? You get this mind-numbing one-star review, heavily complaining that the massive building was terribly boring and just full of old dusty stuff. The profound, heartbreaking disappointment of wandering into a building strictly labeled History Museum and actually finding ancient history inside of it is a uniquely devastating tragedy of our modern, hyper-stimulated digital age. 47. You really have to admire the raw, unhinged confidence it takes to write this next complaint. A customer purchased a beautiful 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of a majestic landscape, only to leave a completely devastating one-star review. Why? They were absolutely livid that the picture arrived in the mail completely broken into 1,000 tiny cardboard pieces. They demanded a full refund for the manufacturer's blatant destruction of property. They bought a puzzle and were genuinely enraged that they actually had to solve it. 48. A local, highly respected municipal cemetery actually received a completely serious, one-star review online for its total lack of engaging atmosphere and completely unfriendly, quiet residents. The deeply observant visitor heavily complained that absolutely nobody was talking to them, and the whole dreary property just felt incredibly dead. Well, buddy, technically speaking, you are absolutely not wrong about that assessment. The sheer lack of baseline self-awareness happening in this digital review is currently buried about 6 feet under the earth. 49. The eternal, exhausting human struggle against the horrifying concept of manual physical labor is perfectly captured in this glorious one-star review for a steel gardening shovel. The sweaty user complained aggressively that the heavy tool made their lower back hurt and simply required way too much physical effort to operate. They fundamentally did not want to buy a shovel. They were actively in the market for a magical, self-operating dirt-relocating wizard wand. The steel pole was definitely not the broken tool in this scenario. 50. Just try to imagine being legitimately furious at a heavy-duty wilderness survival whistle for having the absolute nerve to be loud. An outdoor enthusiast left a scathing one-star review for an emergency rescue whistle, whining terribly that the plastic tube hurt their delicate ears when they blew into it with all their might. That is quite literally the entire point of the object. It is heavily engineered by scientists to be heard over the roar of a collapsing mountain avalanche, not to gently summon your imaginary butler. Honestly, the fact that these people are allowed to vote and drive cars is terrifying. Which of these absolute geniuses do you think is the biggest threat to society? Name them in the comments. I want to see who you despise the most. If your brain hasn't completely melted yet, hit the subscribe button and like this video before the internet completely ruins us all.